I had the privilege of being the oldest of three brothers, and being in that position meant that when I was pretty young, my dad started taking me out to the oil wells with him. One of the recollections of growing up in an oil-producing family was the fact that not only did my dad engage in working in the oil field, but I had most of my uncles did too. My dad had three older brothers, Raymond Hovis and Eugene Hovis, who both were involved in the oil fields and had their own oil leases and properties. And his younger brother Bill worked part-time in the oil fields, but he had a day job also. But all four of them were totally involved in working in the oil fields. And my granddad Roy, their dad, was in the oil fields all his life. He helped drill wells back in his earlier years, and then in later years he pumped for different companies around the Clintonville area. And in fact, some of his son-in-laws and some of his own kids would call him the pumper. And a lot of times when we had family gatherings and family picnics, the pumper would be there, and of course they got him involved in telling stories about the oil field. And there wasn't many family picnics where there wasn't a lot of oil being either drilled or wells fixed, or a lot of discussion about it. So if you didn't talk oil, sometimes you didn't have much to say at the family gatherings.
From the time we could pick up a wrench, we had to go to the lease every day, and there's a lot of memories from that. We would be pulling wells and have to take our penknife and clean our pants off from the grease. And we'd go home so dirty, Mom she wouldn't even want to wash the clothes. Myself and my two brothers and Dad and the dog, we had to go to the lease in the summertime we went about every day.
When Dad took us to the lease when we were little, he did kind of incorporate, he'd let us play, build trails and stuff like that. And then when he needed us, we were there, so he let you be a kid, but you still were, Mom would pack her lunch, and the iced tea was wrapped up in about 16 layers of old newspaper in a brown sack. That was a thermos. And peanut butter and jelly. That was because it wouldn't spoil. And probably some bananas or something. That was your lunch,
One thing to say, it was nice to be in the oil business, because it in those years it was a much bigger industry in our local area than it is today, now 50 or 60 years later. And a lot more people were involved in it. But thinking back, one of the things that I remember, I got involved pretty early in going to the wells with my dad, and I got the opportunity to, if you call it that, to carry out rods. But I guess I think of it as a privilege today that I had two granddads, Granddad Roy, my dad's father, and Granddad Lou, which was my mother's father. At one time or other, when I was 6 or 7 years old, we pulled some wells where they wrenched the rods, and I got to carry them out. So it was kind of a neat thing to work with my two different granddads at various times.
I remember one time we were pulling the well over there, and I can't remember if I was wrenching rods or what I was doing. At the beginning, we started in the morning, and it was really hot that day. I mean, maybe it was 90 degrees. We started pulling tubing. Well, Granddad was there, and it was so hot, and we were just soaked from the oil. Oil running down all over here. So it's awful hot. And he always wore these green shirts, green pants, and suspenders. And he would just laugh, and anyway, we pulled all day long. I just couldn't imagine him out there with long sleeve shirt, long pant. It was just, so anyway, we were all done for the day, and Granddad's over there cleaning up, and he took his shirt off, took his penknife, and here he had long underwear on. He had, and I said, "Granddad," I said, "you have long underwear?" He said, "I have my summer long underwear on. They were cotton, not only the bottoms but the tops, underneath that long sleeve shirt." He said it actually keeps you cool.
Just one thing that comes to mind that oil field work, while it's kind of interesting and maybe there's a certain romance to it, but it's a lot of hard work. And some of the things we haven't mentioned yet is most of the wells we operated, at least in those times, used motion lines from a central power and gas engine to operate the slave jacks where the wells would pump out the oil. And it was not uncommon for the rod lines to break. Well, every time you had a rod line break, that meant you had a fair amount of work to do.
And then the price went down too. The price went down for several years of oil, and it really was really marginal whether it would be worth doing all that effort. And then, of course, here just a year or two ago, it was up over $100 a barrel, and you never dreamed that you'd ever see that in our lifetime. But luckily, I mean, by running the wells on an everyday basis and keeping what we do have going to a certain extent, you reap the harvest whenever the price does go up like that, because you're already pumping oil. I mean, if you go out and try to start from scratch the day you hear the oil went up on TV, by the time you would get wells drilled and fixed up, the price would be gone. So that's the advantage of the people that do it on a regular basis. They're in your everyday pitching, whether it's good or bad. And that's kind of the way the oil business has always been. You have to take the good or the bad with the good. I mean, there's a lot more bad usually as there is good.
As we mentioned, servicing the wells, pulling the wells was another amount of work. And pulling the rods, which many of the wells today have, or most wells today have iron sucker rods. But in those days, a lot of them were wooden, and sometimes they would break, and if they did, then you had a fishing job. But if you had to change cups, you pulled all the rods out. And of course, as has been mentioned, there's grease on the outside of those rods, and so as you pull them out of the well, you're trying to skim that grease off so it doesn't fall down on your head or your clothes, but still you get pretty dirty. And as has been mentioned, when we went home at night, sometimes our clothes just got kind of thrown away rather than even tried to clean. So then, in addition to the rods that are moving the valves that lift the fluid out of the well, there's also 2-inch pipe. And a lot of times you get holes in the 2-inch pipe, which is bringing the fluid to the surface that then runs to the storage tank. And when you get a hole in that pipe, then you have to pull the whole string. And typically a 1,000-foot well, which is pretty typical for a lot of the wells we have, some are deeper than that, maybe 11 or 1,200 feet. But the 2-inch tubing joints are typically 20 foot on an average. So you can do the math there. You have quite a few joints in 1,000 feet, and each one of them is threaded. So you unscrew that with 9 or 10 rotations to unscrew it, and then pull all those out of the hole and stack it, find the hole, and then repeat that process to put the well back together. So as you grew from being a youngster to a teenager, and if you spent a lot of times in the summer doing that, you did build some muscles. That would be one side benefit of working in the oil field.
This model back here was built by my Uncle Eugene and Dad. I remember this was always upstairs in my Uncle Eugene's garage, which was really his workshop. And it sat upstairs in this garage. And of course, when you were a little kid back then, everybody knew it was up there. but you didn't dare ask to go see it, and we were not allowed to play with that.
We used to use a Fortson tractor with an old Myers winch. And then, I don't know, I wasn't very old, probably 12 or 13, he got to Farm OH with a winch. And that, at that time, that was quite an advancement over the old Fortson tractor. And it was a lot easier to handle, and it was faster and pretty slick. And then we use that yet today. It's been rebuilt. The engine's been rebuilt a couple of times and gone over, but that's probably been in service 40 years with us, somewhere around there.
Dad had his own cure for when the dogs had fleas. And the first time I saw this happen, I thought he was killing the dog. What he would do is take the dog down to the tank. He would hold on to the front paws and hold his hand over the nozzle of the dog and dip it down in the tank. And he'd pull the dog up, and he'd just, oh, geez. And he'd let go, the dog would take off down through the woods, and the oil was just flying. But I'll tell you what, our dogs never had fleas. And their coats were always real shiny.
Every summer we'd end up killing a number of rattlesnakes. And I don't remember exactly how many, but maybe half a dozen or so for years. And we had this old half-breed beagle dog called Teddy. And one summer, Teddy got bit by a rattlesnake, and he just went off in the swamp and laid in the swamp for a couple days, and that's evidently the dog knew the cure for what to do after getting bit by a rattlesnake.
Dad told Gary and I to go get our lunches up at the powerhouse, so we're walking up to the powerhouse, and I can't remember if Gary saw it, but somebody yelled, "There's a snake!" And I think Gary stepped on it, and I was like in midair, and we had our old dog with us, and that dog grabbed that snake and started whipping that snake, and we were standing there and there were pieces of meat on our pant legs. That's how much the dog hated rattlesnakes.
One other recollection, when we were fairly small, as had been mentioned, we used to take our lunches with us when we went with Dad. And this one time, our mother had packed our lunches, and I think both myself and my brothers liked peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and Lebanon bologna sandwiches. And it was kind of a contest to see how many of those you could eat. So this one day we had went out in the morning and had our lunches packed, and I think we even hung them on a tree so that, or a small shrub, so they wouldn't be sitting on the ground, because we had to walk back to where this well was. And we went to get our lunches and get under the shade tree to open them up, and we opened our lunches up, and as we did, here we found out the sandwiches were full of ants. And the ants were having a feast already, but we were hungry enough, we just decided we're going to eat them anyway. So the ants lost out.